Hi cozy friends, and welcome back to my cozy corner. It is the end of June and you know what that means. It's time for a mid-year reading wrap up. Before we jump into the questions, I want to talk about a few stats. I have read 16 books so far this year. 8 of them were 5-star books. As far as the genres, 14 of them were fantasy/sci-fi and or magical realism, and 3 of them were literary fiction. Almost all of these books were read on my Kindle because I am currently living abroad and I don't have access to my physical library, but I really want to talk about some of my favorite and least favorite books so far of this year, and hopefully you can get some book recommendations out of this video. Diving right into the book tag questions, the first question is, what is the best book you have read so far in 2024? The Unmaking of June Farrow by Adrienne Young. I picked up June Farrow in the beginning of January, and I knew it was going to probably be on my favorites of the year, if not the favorite of the year. The Unmaking of June Farrow is a speculative fantasy, and it follows June Farrow, is from a cursed lineage of women and lives in a small town in North Carolina. She is struggling to cope with the loss of her grandmother, and she's also grappling with the cracks starting to show in her own mental health. Everyone in her small town knows that the people in her family eventually lose their mind, so she has been keeping it to herself that she is starting to see and hear things that aren't really there. This story really blends mystery, fantasy, and romance together in such a seamless way, but it's so enthralling that you just can't put it down. I literally couldn't. I read it in 2 days because I just needed to know how it would end. But it's also a really emotional novel because she's trying to break generational curses and she has to choose between 2 lives that she can see the paths playing out in front of her. And in order to make a choice, she also has to make a sacrifice. So if you have any takeaways from this video, please read The Unmaking of June Farrow. And I'd love for you to let me know down in the comments what has been your favorite book so far of 2024. Question number 2 is, what is your favorite sequel you've read so far? And mine is easily The Winter of the Witch by Catherine Arden. I read the whole Winter Night trilogy this year, but the last book really blew it out of the water for me. Like, I could honestly reread just this book of the series for eternity. And I feel like that's a common theme in some of my favorite books, and Ignite Me, Heir of Fire, those immediately come to mind. The third book is always the best. The Winter Night trilogy is a historical fantasy that is inspired by Russian folklore, and it follows Vazia, who is a young girl who can see and communicate with spirits that other people cannot. In the time she is living in, Christianity is spreading throughout the community and magic is really feared. Satanic panic is really rampant, and they are burning women at the stake for even an accusation of witchcraft. The first book really follows her coming of age and struggling to survive in the brutality of the cold winters and the evil men that call themselves pastors, which some of us can relate to even in this generation. But the third book really explodes the magic and the world and the romance. The slow burn romance finally is on fire, and the writing is just exquisite. So I highly recommend you check out The Bear and the Nightingale, which is the first book in the Winter Night trilogy. The next question is newest fictional crush, and that one by far and away goes to the Winter King or the Frost Demon from the series I was just talking about. And in that third book, like I said, the romance just really comes to a head, and the Land of Midnight is introduced, which is so interesting. I really want a whole nother series just in that world. So the third book was just an incredible wrap up to this series and just an amazing surprise. The next question is actually biggest surprise. Hello Beautiful by Ann Napolitano, which is the book I talked about in last week's Cozy Hobby vlog. This book really surprised me because I almost gave up on it at about the 20% mark. I didn't really know where it was going, but then I fell absolutely in love with it. Hello Beautiful follows William, who is struggling with depression and his own identity. He's never really felt loved or like he had a family. And when he meets Julia, he's just kind of adopted into her family, and she has 3 sisters. Her and her sisters are really reminiscent of Little Women. They even refer to themselves as the Sisters of Little Women at times. But this story really also touches on generational curses and how William was handed down the depression of his parents, and then the sisters, their mother was very conditional with her love for them, and you see how that weighed on them and the ways it impacts the choices they make for themselves in their life, and also the ways in which their pain and their choices impacts their children, and some of the selfish choices we make out of our own traumas and pains and hurts. But it was also a story of redemption and forgiveness, grief and love, and it was so impactful. And the story spans over their entire lives. So it was an amazing read, and I'm really happy that it surprised me. The next question is book that made you cry. The Time Traveler's Wife made me sob. My husband was cooking dinner and he just turns around to the sound of me sobbing, and I'm like, don't even ask. And then proceeded to rant for like 10 minutes about how horribly amazing this book is. It is a time travel romance about Henry, who involuntarily time travels. He doesn't live his life in a chronological linear timeline. At any given time, he may just snap out of his body and wake up in a different year. He wakes up disoriented and hungry and naked. So obviously it's really a burden for him rather than a supernatural gift. We also follow Claire, who eventually becomes his wife in the story, but she really spends her entire life waiting on him. From the first time she meets him, she can't wait for him to pop back into her life, but then later when they are married, she's always waiting for him to return to her. This book was just one of those romances that like also feels so tragic, and it really tugs on your heartstrings, and you just are rooting for them the entire time, but they're always being kept apart for one reason or another. On another note, a book that made you happy. The Fragile Threads of Power by V.E. Schwab was definitely the lighthearted book I needed. Even though there's so many dark tones, it was just like coming home to step back into the worlds of the Londons. The Fragile Threads of Power is a new series following the events that happened in A Darker Shade of Magic in the same worlds and even with some of the same characters. These worlds are 4 parallel Londons that have varying relationships and connections to magic. Some of them have flourishing magic and some of them have been corrupted by magic. And then there are also Antari magicians who can travel between the Londons. I really enjoyed stepping back into these worlds. I can't wait to see what she does with this new series, but it was such a comfort to get more from these characters, and there are so many internal conflicts going on. There's also new external factors and new plots building up. It was really fun, but I would honestly read anything V.E. Schwab gives me. The next question is, what books do you want to reread this year? I am slowly rereading the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas, but I'm rereading them on audio, and honestly, rereading your favorite books on audio is such a treat. I highly recommend picking up your favorite books on audio if you haven't already. It's such a different way to experience the story. Throne of Glass is a YA fantasy series following Selena, who is a young assassin who has been sentenced to die in slavery. She is given the opportunity to have her crimes forgiven by working for the tyrannical king. But the third book that I most recently reread on audio is when the series really amps up from being a YA fantasy to more of a high fantasy. There's new backstories, there's new characters, there's new magic systems introduced, and everything just really explodes in this book. It's so good. I'd love for you to let me know down in the comments what your favorite comfort book to reread is. Favorite authors so far this year. As I already said earlier, I love reading from V.E. Schwab. She is such a genius with words, but I also have to say Adrienne Young really blew me out of the water this year. I read Fable from her in the past couple of years and I really loved it, but I read 2 more of her books this year and they were both 5 stars. Absolutely love her writing and definitely can't wait to read more of them. Favorite new author, either new to you or debut. Amelia Hart debuted with Wayward last year and I just read it this year. It was absolutely incredible and I loved her writing style. It's a historical fantasy about 3 women who live in different centuries and all have this magical connection to nature. There are a lot of messages about the patriarchy and women's strength and resilience through this book. There is a lot of heavy subjects handled in this book. It is so dark, it is so good, it's really thrilling, but most of all, it is beautifully written. She also has a Siren book coming out, which if you know me, I'm obsessed with Siren mythology and will read any Siren book I can get my hands on. I think that's coming out next year and I cannot wait to read it. Most beautiful book you've bought so far this year or received. My friend Haley sent me the collector's edition of Shatter Me before we left the States. I wanted to bring it with me so badly, but I didn't want to shove it in our suitcase and risk it getting damaged. It was so gorgeous. I will put a picture of what it looks like on the screen. Shatter Me is one of my nostalgic favorite books. Haley actually recommended this series to me many years ago and it became became a favorite. It is a YA dystopian about a girl with lethal touch who has been locked up to protect others from her power, but now the government wants to use her as a weapon. The writing style is very unique and quite divisive for readers, but there are strikeouts and repeated lines that really showcase her sanity and the loss of her sanity as she has been isolated and locked up for so long. But it is honestly one of the most beautiful books I own. What books do you want to read by the end of the year? I really want to read This Is How You Lose the Time War. It is a sci-fi novel that follows two rival agents named Red and Blue, and they are engaging in a war across time, but apparently it's a love story and they fall in love despite them being on opposing sides of this war, and it sounds so good. I can't wait to read it. I really love any books that mess with the concept of time or deal with time travel, so I really think this will be a good one for me. And I also really need to read Divine Rivals, honestly in some ways similar to the premise of This Is How You Lose the Time War, but it is a fantasy romance novel about two young journalists who are corresponding during a war from opposing sides, but I think they also develop feelings for each other, just like in This Is How You Lose the Time War. So I think that trope really appeals to me, and I can't wait to pick up both of those. I also really want to read Tom Lake, which is a lit fic about a mother who's telling her daughters about a romance she had with a celebrity many years prior. I think it takes place during the pandemic, so it's really about like the ways in which we connected with each other when we had time to just slow down and connect. New releases that you haven't read yet but want to. I really want to read The Ministry of Time. I have been eyeballing it every time we step foot in a bookstore. I just haven't purchased it yet. It is a time travel romance and thriller. It's a civil servant who is helping time traveling expats adjust to their new time frame that they're living in. And as someone who is currently living as an expat, I thought that was such a fun concept. So I really can't wait to read that as well. Books you've been putting off. For some reason, I keep procrastinating finishing series that I'm really loving and enjoying. More specifically, The Last Magician by Lisa Maxwell, which is a time travel urban fantasy series. It has magical heists, thieves, slow burn romance, and found family. It has lots of interesting point of views and timelines, and I just really enjoy it. I finished book 2 at the beginning of this year, but I haven't picked up book 3 yet, as well as Mistborn, which I read the first book of and absolutely loved it, but I just haven't picked up book 2 yet. It is a high fantasy series that takes place in a world where the bad guy won, and we are following a group of characters who have magical abilities and are forming a rebellion to try to overthrow the government. It has such a unique magic system and also has magical heists, found family, all the things we love to see. So I really can't wait to complete both of those series. I just haven't been in the mood to read a long series at the moment. A book you enjoyed with mixed reviews. Definitely Time Traveler's Wife. I feel like all of the reviews on The Time Traveler's Wife were either 5 stars or like no stars. People either love or hate this book. Some people feel as though he is grooming her when he goes back in time and meets the child version of his wife. All of this is really out of his control, and it's a very unique circumstance, and I don't think it's trying to romanticize an inappropriate relationship, even though it can feel uncomfortable at times. I really think that this book perfectly depicted like how complicated and complex it would be to experience life in a non-linear way, and how much it would impact not only you but the people who love you. 5-star predictions for the rest of the year. I really think This Is How You Lose the Time War will be a home run for me. If not that one, then definitely Divine Rivals. Any new goals for your reading this year? I really just want to read more books that hit on my favorite tropes and things that have elements in common with my favorite books. Like, I just want to have more all-time favorite books. As you've probably noticed in this video, time travel is one of those tropes I just can't get enough of, so I'm definitely reading more of that. Do you think you'll reach your reading goal this year, or are you going to change it? I'm definitely going to pass my reading goal this year. I had my goal at 20 books, but I really thought I wanted to read 24. That would be 2 books a month. That seems like a nice goal. But so far I've already read 16 and we're at the halfway point, so I'm definitely gonna hit my goal, and I'm so happy with that. I don't think numbers matter as much as enjoying what you're reading, but I'm experiencing both right now, so that's really, really great. I honestly haven't reached my reading challenge goals in a few years. I think 2019 was the last time I reached my goal. That time I really blew it out of the water because I read 75 books when my goal had been 50. But since then, my reading really dropped off, which is fair. I've become a mom, and I also was struggling with my mental health, and reading just wasn't my escape anymore. I had gotten really burnt out with it. But once I got my Kindle last year, I just have started enjoying reading in a whole new way, and it's been really, really nice. I read so much more consistently on Kindle, and I think it's because it's more accessible for my current lifestyle. I have a whole video about why I prefer reading on my Kindle, which you can watch up here. I'd love to know if you have a reading goal this year. Are you setting it as a number, or are you setting it as reading more of a certain genre? I'd love to hear what your goals are. What genre have you read the most of? Fantasy, sci-fi, and magical realism are the most read genres for me always, but magical realism has really become like a cozy security blanket for me. I am loving reading more of that. Did you have any DNFs this year? I DNF'd Daughter of Smoke and Bone at like the 50% mark. It is a YA fantasy that has angels and demons, and I picked it up because I heard it has a reincarnation romance, which I really love, but the writing just wasn't for me. I think if I picked this book up in like 2014, I would have ate it up, but it did not feel like Laini Taylor's writing that I really love from Strange the Dreamer. So I decided to put that series down, and I probably won't be picking it back up. Have you changed any of your ratings? I think I changed Fragile Threads of Power and Dear Edward from 5 stars to 4.5. In retrospect, they were rated that highly because I enjoyed the experience of reading them, but I don't think that as a story, they hit that 5-star mark for me that some of the other books I've read so far this year did. And I also changed Time Traveler's Wife from 4.5 to 5 because in retrospect, the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I really loved that story. Which book disappointed you the most? This is probably a little unpopular, but I really was disappointed with Fourth Wing. This is a romantasy with a touch of dragons. I listened to it on audio. If I hadn't, I probably would have DNF'd. I think reading books like this on audio is always really entertaining. I don't feel like there was enough emphasis on the plot or character development. I feel like for me, there is a difference between book talk books that are like written to fulfill certain book tropes and then book talk books that are popular because they are so good. And this book specifically falls into the former category. Both are valid in their own right, and this book definitely has a niche. It just isn't me, and that's okay. I just finished reading The Lost Apothecary, and that one also was incredibly disappointing. It just did not give what I thought it would. I was expecting Wayward, but I got Wayward's like sad ugly cousin. Can I say that? So those are all the questions. If you weren't taking notes, here are all the 5-star books that I've read so far this year that you should definitely pick up. Thank you so much for watching my mid-year reading wrap up. I really hope you found some good book recommendations in this video. If you're looking for more book recommendations, you should definitely check out my favorite books of all time video. For even more cozy content, make sure you follow my Instagram so that we can be besties, and make sure you tap subscribe so you don't miss future cozy videos. Don't forget to do something that brings you comfort, and I will be wishing you a very cozy week.